Why has Russia invaded Ukraine? Welcome to Mark and Pete Live. I'm Pete the Clergyman. With me, as ever, with another perspective, is Mark the Businessman. And we're here to talk about one of the hot button issues of today. So, why is it then? Why has Russia invaded Ukraine? What's that about, Mark?
Well, it's interesting you say about the hot buttons. Yes, there are too many being pushed at this moment in
Yeah,
time.
I think so. I think that's
I
it.
say here that many people have been focused on the atrocities that have been occurring, and we've seen it across the media. People have been killed, people displaced, buildings and landscapes just simply annihilated. But I think there's a bigger story. And the story for me is much broader, and it goes back many, many decades, in my opinion. And that is back to the old regime that Russia once had, the USSR. And if you remember, obviously, Ukraine was part of that. And interestingly, somebody called Vladimir Putin was
Oh,
very
interesting.
much a KGB agent and rose to fame and power. And what's interesting, in my opinion, is that Putin seems to hold very much dear to the past, and there's a history here. And the reason I bring it up to date is that what you will probably be aware of is that there are many people in Ukraine and in Russia who have family connections. So it's not just simply that they have annoying neighbors on their doorstep here. The issue for Putin, in my opinion, is that I think there's been a lot of propaganda spun from the West in terms of what Ukraine's motivation is. Similarly, I think that Russia has done some spinning themselves here.
Yeah,
But I do want to put it in context that which I don't think comes across is the history here. And Putin, I think, is seeing very much that there's a challenge,
yeah,
perceived challenge from the West,
yeah.
where if Ukraine, with its perceived allegiance to the West, were possibly to get involved in NATO, I personally think that would be a mistake under the current situation. But if that would be the case, that's one of the reasons why it's sort of fueling some issues for Putin. Similarly, again, on the other side, I think that there are a lot of people in Ukraine who probably don't want to be part of Putin's vision of having a Russian empire again. So, in many ways, I think what people have to understand here is the history. However, what I do think is important is that we need to now find, as all nations involved in this, just simply handing over more weaponry to fuel the war. So,
Mm.
as you probably gather, I'm alluding to Britain, America, and anywhere else, is only just going to prolong the matter. I think that what needs to happen is there needs to be an agreement with Russia, Ukraine, and perhaps other nations who could come together around the table and say, look, let's come to some form of compromise. Do we give Russia the Donbass regions or whatever it may be?
Yeah,
But the point is that the longer this goes on, the worse it will get.
yeah,
Because if you look at what's happening with people migrating from Ukraine to Poland, Poland has been very accommodating. How long can that carry on? More and more people being displaced. What happens when the war actually ends? They can't go back. There are no
mhm,
homes. So
yeah,
I think
yeah.
what we need to find is that just simply fueling the war alone is not enough. Now we need to come to a resolution. So I'd be interested to know your thoughts on
Well,
what the solution should be.
well, yeah. I think that the a crucial misconception here is what Putin actually wants from the invasion. There's no sign really that this is part of Putin's expansionist aims. I don't doubt that he would like to have the whole of the continent under Russian control. But what is, instead of looking at what he wants personally, what are his aims in this political action? What is he trying to do? What he seems to be trying to do is, first of all, protect his reputation and protect Russians, Russian-speaking Ukrainians in the
Yep.
east, in the Donbass region, the area you were referring to. Now, if you go back to reports on the region from before this current conflict, I've got one in front of me from 2019. There's there's talk mainly in terms of abuses, in terms of violence that's unwarranted from the Ukrainian army.
Mm.
And what's described here as in the article in front of me as from World Report 2019 as a genocide of the Russian speaking Ukrainians, the people in that eastern region that you were talking about. And so what we're really seeing here is Putin, I think, being played, being pushed by the West, and I would say just from their public announcements, which is what I can go on, by the American government, by Biden and his team there in the White House, being played. He's been pushed, cajoled into invading, and this has happened because of the Ukrainian president talk about going back to having nuclear weapons, but mainly the issue of talk about rejoining NATO, also referred to by Biden. Now, President Biden of the US also said if the Russians were to simply have a small incursion, he said, words to that effect anyway, then it wouldn't be such a problem. That's what he was saying, and this really gave Putin the push, I think, to move into Ukraine, and then immediately what seems like a coordinated propaganda, I guess, effort by the media in the West, right across Western countries, including banning Russian TV stations like Russia Today, and in their own media pushing a Ukrainian nationalist perspective against Russia. It seems to me that the Putin, although he's a very clever politician and diplomat, has been played here and pushed into war. And so what I think Putin wants really is to get out of it. So if he's offered, as you were saying earlier, Mark, some way of saving face and coming out of it, he would take it. But he can't do that without the minimum requirements. One is that the Donbass region goes to Russia. That's perfectly reasonable because the two sort of states within a state there, the two regions, which have their own parliaments in that part of Ukraine, they had organized referenda on whether to be part of Ukraine or Russia, and people voted to join Russia. And the military from those two regions are fighting alongside the Russians. So it's it would be a real step down for Putin to give up those regions. And if there was simply an undertaking, maybe a change in the constitution of Ukraine such that they won't join NATO, that would be enough.
Well, I agree.
War. I think that's all that Putin wants to answer my own question.
Yeah, and I think this concept of should we say, what would eventually be a neutral zone or something like that, is something that potentially is a solution. But what I'm worried about here is that the human cost of this, as well as the business cost, we're seeing obviously escalating prices. We're seeing sanctions being imposed on Russia. We can understand why that is, but I'm not necessarily thinking that's long term the best thing to happen. We need to get to solving the problem. And I think that the quicker the better, because if it carries on, we're going to end up with other things. People have very short memories. You remember Syria? Yes.
Yeah,
Whatever
indeed.
happened there? Literally millions of people displaced. And think of the consequence of that, where, yes, okay, different situation, different politics, different region. But the principle of consequence of war was such that many, many innocent people, sadly, lost their lives, they lost their businesses, and they were displaced. And we're seeing that happen again. Now, the Syria situation, you can argue, has not necessarily gone away. It's still there. What I'm worried about here is, apart from the immediate conflict, protecting innocent people, we want to stop war. But it's the impact it's having on lives and potentially generations. If that hasn't already happened, we're already at a point now of no return. People have lost, the fathers, the mothers, the brothers, sisters, and so on, and they've lost people, and this is going to have impact on many people's lives. So rebuilding is, in my opinion, where the focus should be, and I don't see that effort on either side. Any side. And that's the thing that's slightly concerning for me, that people are not putting the focus there. But,
Mhm.
I mean, I ask you, Clergyman Pete, from a clergyman's point of view, I mean, is there anything from a religious perspective or even a for spiritual perspective of things that people should be praying for?
Yeah.
What's
Well,
your take on this?
well, the thing which we should praying for is a key aspect of Christianity. It's a title given to Jesus. He's called the Prince of Peace. It's taken from prophecy in Isaiah about when he would come and be the Prince of Peace. Peace is always the aim, and supporting the nationalism and the nation of Ukraine um, for spurious reasons is bad. So is let's be honest. So is the push into Ukraine by Russia because it's causing violence. Both sides are in the wrong here. What the Prince of Peace wants is a negotiated settlement, I'm sure, but also humanitarian aid to the people who are most affected. And I think the main emphasis in our response here is what about the normal, ordinary people in Ukraine who
Exactly.
just want to have enough to eat and be able to get home safely at night without being shot or blown up? Let's think about those people, also those displaced, having and going into other countries. And great, Christian, many Christians in Poland. Accepting refugees in large numbers. Let's think about those people. So I think that's the Christian aspect. Really, is peace is always worth suing for, and compassion is the best response. That's what I'd say. But I think, Mark, you you've got a good way of summing up this particular situation. You know,
Yes, I
not
think
human.
here's a little thought for listeners all around the world. And perhaps we've reached a point where maybe we've just simply fallen from grace. The dove of peace once built a nest, but nations just saw it as a pest. Then it died from being overstressed, and now it sadly lays to rest.
Yes, yes. Well, that's uh, that's it for this time. If you want to leave your own comments and thoughts, please do so below. If you're on YouTube or Rumble, if you're on our actual website, listen to the audio version. There's a place to comment there. But for this week, that's all from Mark and Pete. Remember to subscribe. Catch you next time.